So all three of our readings today have to do with suffering and our relationship with God, and our relationship also with nature. By the time God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, Job has lost everything. His family, his possessions, his home, his animals, his health, even his friends, after they try to put the blame on him for his own circumstances. His friends are well-meaning, wanting to offer an explanation for so much hardship, feeling sure that Job must have done something to bring this on. It is the way we are in the face of it. We want to blame someone or blame the victim or even ourselves. If I only had done this or that, it wouldn't have gone this way. The book of Job is historically important because it shows that an innocent and pious man can suffer calamity and that this calamity is not a punishment from God. Job is a book about the struggle to understand suffering in a new way. Until this time, it was believed that good actions bring good blessing and bad actions bring calamity. God was seen as punitive and God's love as highly conditional. The story behind Job's predicament is that the Satan, or in Hebrew, the Ha-Satan, who later became Satan in the New Testament, he came before God as a part of God's heavenly council. His role, the Satan's role in the world, was to investigate earthly affairs. He was known as the accuser or the adversary, always looking to see where there might be a lack of faith in God. The equivalent, he was, of our devil's advocate. God points out Job to the Satan as the epitome of goodness and righteousness and love of God. And the Satan says, sure, he's in awe of you now, but just see what he does when you strip everything away from him, his family, his prosperity, his health. The Satan reasons that this kind of scrutiny will only bring the truth to light. So God takes the wager, with the caveat that the Satan may not kill Job, and right away, Job begins to lose everything. We cannot be philosophical or even theological when we are in the midst of suffering. This is what Job's friends are trying to do, to say, you must have done something to bring this on, to try to find meaning in it when it is meaningless. I have friends in Key West, new friends, a group of writers I met on a writing retreat last spring. We had a little text thread yesterday, and I shared that I was working on a sermon about God speaking to Job in the whirlwind. And one friend wrote, "Looks like another whirlwind is heading our way," and then said, "I wonder what the message is." But the story in Job is a metaphor that we can mull over. We can find meaning in it because what is happening to Job is hopefully not happening to us. And we can read it as allegory and as metaphor. But the people in North Carolina cannot, nor the people in Florida who are facing 2 major storms in the next few days. They are suffering. Howard Thurman writes, "There is something utterly personal and private about it. The encounter with suffering is always personal at the point of contact with the individual. An earthquake, or in this case a hurricane, may destroy a city in a vast upheaval that seems like the temper tantrum of elemental forces. Yet to every human being who suffers loss of family, loss of limb, or loss of life, it is a moment of naked intimacy with pain, terror, and disaster." Throughout the series of losses that Job suffers, he does not lose faith in God. At the same time that he curses the day he is born, he also cries out, "I know that my Redeemer lives," and gives us a gorgeous soliloquy on his understanding of God's work in creation and how God reveals God's self. Job says, "Ask the animals and they will teach you, the birds of the air and they will tell you. Ask the plants of the earth, and they will tell you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing. This is so reminiscent of the words of St. Francis, whose feast day we celebrate today with the blessing of animals. Job is saying, look and see, God's wisdom is in creation. Rejoice and be glad in it, or at least honor it, even in the face of suffering. So St. Francis lived a life of luxury. We hear this a lot. The Buddha did this too. Many saints started out in luxury with all the privileges of wealth. And he was a rebellious teenager who was reputed to have partied a lot and to have been very charming and vain. He was supposed to go into his father's textile business, but instead pursued his dream of becoming a knight, a version of a superhero in his day. War broke out just then, and Francis got caught up in it and was taken political prisoner. He spent a year in a dank cell waiting to be ransomed by his father. And when he was finally set free, he was changed. For one thing, he was physically ill and psychically traumatized. He no longer wanted the privileged life he had had before. Now he was drawn to solitude and prayer and caring for lepers who were, in those days, the very least of these. Through a series of events, Francis became a devout Christian. He gave up all his possessions and lived a life of complete poverty, seeing God in all creation. There is a story of him preaching to a flock of sparrows. In his Canticle of the Creatures, he praises the sun as brother, the moon as sister, the wind as brother, the water as sister, the fire as brother, and earth as sister and mother. He urges his followers to connect again to the elements, the animals, the birds, the plants, the stars. In 1979, Pope John Paul named St. Francis of Assisi the patron saint of ecology because of his sense of kinship with all creatures and the entire created world. Francis was radical because he lived in a time when Earth was considered the center of the universe and human beings were considered the center of the earth. Yet Francis saw God in all creatures, each one as precious to God, as an expression of God, and love as central to everything. This was a deeply visionary perspective in his time. The love of creation is not a romantic idea. It is a responsibility to a way of life that honors our natural world, that gives tribute not only verbally but in lived actions to the deep and abiding integrity of life on this planet. And how can we do this when we find ourselves embedded into a commercially oriented world where living naturally becomes almost impossible for any of us who are doing anything, striving to make a living, support our families, pursue a career, or struggling financially? Try, for instance, for 1 week, not to use any plastic. It is nearly impossible. This is where the whirlwind message comes in. Job demands a meeting with God, and God does come and speaks to Job. But God doesn't answer any of Job's questions, doesn't even touch upon them. In fact, instead of answering Job, God asks him questions. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? God asks questions about the divine order of the cosmos, a cosmos that is regulated by God's power and care. God asks, what do you know about all this, huh? Job is small in comparison to all this creation, even with all his suffering. God is showing Job that much of creation, if not all of creation, thrives without human beings. This speech of God's does not show human beings as part of this creation. The voice of God from the whirlwind is telling Job, telling us, that the incredible power of the life-giving generative forces of God are perennial and always present, and this is the greatest mystery. Not only a mystery, but a perspective on life that we must set most present in our sights. There is something greater than us at play in our world, a sustaining and abiding spirit that transcends political discourse, transcends disagreements, transcends our position on things. As human beings, we have always and forever argued with each other about everything. And right now, it seems like the biggest thing is politics and the upcoming election. But it is important to remember that our issues also transcend the temporal, political, party-affiliated perspectives, and now have to do with whether or not this God-created world, of which we are a part, will tolerate or survive the destruction of environments, will be able to transcend the mountains of garbage, the islands of plastic in the oceans, the presence of so much estrogen in the environment that wild animals are born with deformed sexual organs. It has been over 50 years since the first Earth Day, and there have been many different presidents since then. Not only has very little improved in our environment, but things have gotten worse. The wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods, and record heat waves are far more frequent and more devastating than ever before. We are collectively tearing at the fabric of life by how we are living. So we need to begin to see the environmental crisis as a spiritual crisis, requiring a change in our hearts and a change in our thinking, requiring us to cultivate a future-oriented moral vision. Let us be as radical in our time as St. Francis was in his time. And as Episcopalians, I think we ought to reclaim the original meaning of Ember Days. These Ember Days originated as 3 days, 4 times a year, set apart for fasting and prayer, to thank God for the gifts of nature, to be mindful of using these gifts in moderation, and also to spend time to read nature as a revelation of God. These days are associated with the 4 seasons and with the sowing of seeds and with the harvesting of crops. That's how they began. Over the centuries, Ember Days lost their association with nature and agriculture and began to be seen only as days of penitence and prayer, and eventually they became the days of prayer for those who were going to be ordained to the priesthood. Nothing wrong with that. But if we could collectively engage wholeheartedly for 12 days a year, disengaging from being consumers and choosing to use less of everything, and if we could also begin to really honor a Sabbath day once a week, this could make a difference for our world. It could make a difference in how we prioritize creation in very real ways. If we ask, how will any and all of the things that I do affect the natural world? And remember that every resource we use comes from somewhere, and everything we throw away goes somewhere, and to stay mindful of this. We live in a very different time from the time when the book of Job was compiled, yet the message that God is present in all the workings of the universe is essential for us in our time as well. Dostoevsky puts it this way: love all God's creation, the whole and every grain of sand in it. Love every leaf, every ray of God's life. Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. Once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend it better every day, and you will come at last to love the whole world with an all-embracing love. For St. Francis, his conversion to Christianity was an occasion for great joy. Yes, his life changed dramatically. He gave up material possessions and comforts and subsequently gained an immeasurable love. Surely he must have suffered by living in poverty, but he was motivated by praise and thanksgiving. Perhaps we can be inspired to relinquish some of our comforts as St. Francis did and willingly do without when we can. When we suffer for a reason, we grow. When we find meaning in our suffering, we grow. When we grow, we become more available to one another and have a greater capacity for love. There is a great temptation in our time to fall into despair for so many reasons. But I would say to you this morning, have courage to hope, have courage to love, have courage to imagine a best-case scenario outcome even now, and also to have courage to have joy and delight and goodness that is with us, within us, and around us. Sing, dance, love, rejoice, because the Creator, who is greater than us, rejoices in our rejoicing. Amen.